Pijatoha no kwai. Ibuboam no Koju, Warm Springs, Oregon, White. Inanian, Wilson Wewa. Inuunanian, Wiawiwa. Good evening. My name is Wilson Wewa. My Indian name is Wiawiwa. My grandma gave me my Indian name in 1972. And as you heard, I'm a descendant of Chief Wiawiwa and Chief Palaina that were brothers back in the 1800s. I was really fortunate back in that time. My grandfather passed away in 1972, and my grandma, I think, started to grieve the loss of her husband. And then I graduated from high school, and then my parents bought me a car. But I listened to my grandma's stories about traveling to all the different Paiute reservations, and it just so happened that the Duck Valley Reservation over at Owyhee in northern Nevada, Idaho border was having their 4th of July celebration. So I told my grandma, let's go to Owyhee. And she told me, I don't think anybody will know me because I haven't been over there for over 50 years. So we went, and I unloaded her and put a lawn chair out for her. And we had an aunt over there that said, when you get there, bring her to my food stand. And so that's what I did. Well, I went to park and I came back, and there were several other older people that pulled up chairs and were talking to my grandma in the Paiute language. And that began my education of our Paiute culture, our history, our language, because my grandma started to talk more about. First of all, I was amazed that she was talking our language. The only time I ever heard her talk our language was to my dad or my uncle or my aunt, and she was talking fluent. So on the way home, I was asking her, what were you guys talking about? So she did the best to translate her conversations. And then we went from there, we went to Fort Hall, then we went to Fort Bidwell, then we came down here to visit relatives at Beatty. We went to Nixon, Pyramid Lake Reservation. We started traveling all over. And then she wanted to start getting back into some of the pursuits that she did when she was younger, which was gathering our Indian foods. And that's what I'm doing today. I've been gathering our Indian foods for the past 3 weekends because of her. When she passed away in 1988, she was 107 years old. And when she was the last spring that she was with us, she made me take her out to go dig roots. And so after she passed, I said, I enjoyed being with her. I enjoyed taking her. I enjoyed listening to her stories. And now I'm not going to dig roots no more. I don't have to do that. And then 2 years passed, and people were coming and saying, oh, this year there's so much roots out there all over the place. And one weekend I loaded my pickup up, grabbed my diggers and bags, and got my lunch and took off. And since 1990, I've been digging roots ever since, every spring. But all the stories I learned about my family, about Wiawiwa, the chief of the Northern Paiutes. He was the chief that was recognized in Southwest Idaho, pretty much all of probably 1/5 or 1/3 of the state of Oregon, from the John Day River south and from the Cascade Mountains clear over to Boise. He was the chief of all the Paiute bands. His brother, Palaina, was a leader also among our people. But as I listen to the stories, I have come to the resolve that Wewa was more the diplomat, and his brother Palina was the leader of the warriors. He was the war chief. Through the years, I've come to, because I'm interested in history, where we got to the wars in the 1800s, all started like in the 1840s and 50s with the Umpqua wars over in Southwest Oregon on the other side of the Cascades, and how they were subdued over there. At that time would have been the largest reservation in Oregon was the Table Rock Reservation over around Roseburg. At one point in the history, the Oregon government wanted to put all the tribes from all over Oregon onto the Table Rock Reservation. That didn't happen. Our great chief, Egan, when he was pitched the idea of moving the Paiute people from Southeast Oregon to Southwest Oregon, he said, "My people will never leave our land. This is our home. This is the land that takes care of us, and we'll never leave there. And if you force us force us to move, we're going to fight you." Inevitably, his words came true. That began the wars. Our people were ready for war. They knew, because of whether you wanted to call it this moccasin telegraph or smoke signals or whatever it was, the Paiute people, and not only the Paiute people, but all the tribes knew what happened at the Little Bighorn, the Sioux in Montana. That news got clear to here. And it probably made it here because a player that I'll be talking about a little later was Chief Buffalo Horn, who was a Bannock chief in what is now the state of Idaho. Him and his Shoshone and Bannock people signed on as scouts for the United States Army and fought at the Little Bighorn. That was in 1876. Then in 1877, Chief Joseph of the Nez Perces was forced into a war with the settlers and inevitably the United States Army. Again, Chief Buffalo Horn and his men signed on to become scouts for the United States Army. And they were with General Howard and General Sheridan and those famous generals throughout the campaign, the Nez Perce War Campaign. And then that brings us to 1878, what is now termed the Bannock Paiute War of 1878. That started because the Bannock, which signed a treaty in the state of Idaho that included the Camas Prairies northeast of Mountain Home, Idaho, and in the area of Fairfield. There's some extensive camas fields there, like thousands of acres of camas beds that just turned purple in the springtime and early summer. As white encroachment came into those lands with their cattle and their hogs and their goats, they started eating the leaves of the camas roots. And it just so happened that part of those bands were Buffalo Horn's people that were on the Camas Prairie at that time. And his people came to Buffalo Horn and asked Buffalo Horn, "Go to the military. You were friends with the soldiers. Go and talk to the soldiers at Fort Boise and tell them what's going on. Ask them to help us to remove the white people from the Camas Prairie." Buffalo Horn made 3 attempts to talk to the military for intervention to get the farmers and ranchers out of Camas Prairie. And they refused. They refused to get involved. So Buffalo Horn came back, according to testimonies of our old people. He came back and told them the military don't want to do anything. So then they took it upon themselves with our old way of thinking that when you take a life from somebody, you have to give a life. And because the cattle and the livestock were eating up the camas fields, the Bannock and Shoshone people went out to the camas fields and shot the cattle and pigs and sheep and started to butcher them. Well, then the war started. That's because of all the broken agreements, all the broken treaties that our people have suffered since the 1800s. The Bannocks, the Shoshones, the Northern Paiutes, and many other tribes signed treaties to cease war against the settlers and farmers and ranchers and against the army and against the United States, only for the United States not to fulfill their half of the bargain. So Buffalo Horn became the leader of his band when the ranchers and settlers came against him. And when I talk about these wars, I talk about the army, because among our people, anybody that was fighting against them was the army. But I've learned since that there were a lot of local militias that were made up of ranchers and farmers and town people that had no affiliation to the United States Army per se, but our people looked at them as army. There were the militias, which were state recognized, that signed up people to go against the Paiutes and Bannocks. And so the militias fought against them. And again, our people didn't differentiate them from the settlers. They didn't differentiate them from the United States Army. But it didn't only start with the Bannock War. In the 1850s in Central Oregon, my great-great-great-grandpas, Wiawiwa, Palaina, Itzaama, Boni, Patsigo, they were already fighting for our lands here in Central Oregon. Among our people, in the Paiute people, our people are known by the food areas they come from. In my family, the Wewas, we all come from the Warahitchadikad band of Paiutes, which is the mule deer eaters. My great-great-great-grandpa Palaina, his people were the Hunibwidikad, because his people roamed the John Day River area, even though they were brothers. But like I said, they overlapped in the areas that they roamed. And then you had those people that were from Burns, which were the Wararikad. And then you had the Patkehitchatikad, which were the Paiute bands that were in the Blue Mountains. Our Paiute people extended clear up to Baker and La Grande area. Before those big meadows were plowed under for alfalfa and hay, natural hay, they were extensive camas fields there in those valleys. And so the Paiute people were there. Enmity happened. I was talking earlier with the hosts that asked me to come here about the enmity between the Northern Tribes and the Northern Paiute people. Listening to the stories of the Yakimas, the Nespers, the Umatelas, the Walla Wallas, the Warm Springs, the Wasco people, sometime in history, probably before the coming of people on the Oregon Trail, the Paiute people used to trade at Sililo, the big falls on the Columbia River. They used to trade with the Northern Tribes. One of our commodities I call them commodities. One of our commodities that our people traded was obsidian. Oregon, the state of Oregon probably has the most finest obsidian in all of the United States. Chipped obsidian from our lava beds, from our obsidian places that our people gathered for tens of thousands of years is so sharp when it's spalled off a big chunk that it could match the sharpness of a scalpel. And so our people used obsidian as a trade item at Sililo. So you find obsidian in Washington, British Columbia, Alberta, Montana, that comes from Oregon. Also in that time, late or mid 1700s, the Paiutes and Shoshones were the first ones to have horses. And the Nez Perce tribe has a story of sending a delegation south to acquire the horse from whom they called the Tawelka, which was probably the Bannocks or Shoshone people. And their whole delegation that they sent to trade for horses, it's been told in their stories that they literally went back to Nez Perce country naked because they traded everything they had, paid a big price for the expansion of the horse into the Northwest. In that time, the Great Basin was changing. And so there were no more lush meadows in and around Burns, down around McDermott, Surprise Valley, Silver Lake area. All those lush meadows that were there started to disappear in that time. Even in my time, the past 50 years, when I was a child going with my grandma and grandpa to the root camps east of Burns, my grandparents would point out meadows and aspen trees that are no longer next to Highway 20 between Bend and Burns. So our landscape has really changed even in the past 50 years. Because the landscape couldn't support the horse, the Paiutes went back to not having large horse herds, but to having only what they could take care of and use in their pursuit of life on the Great Basin. It was because of their pursuits and their lifeway rounds of following the foods in Northern Oregon, or in Oregon, state of Oregon, that they went on foot and used the horse only as a pack animal, something that they had done for thousands of years. But with the coming of the Oregon Trail and the exploration that opened up with Ogden, Wyeth, Fremont, all those early explorers that came in, those of you that are history buffs know that Britain was already here. And they were the founders of the Hudson Bay Company, and along with the French. And so the United States, not wanting to be outdone, sent their explorers out here too to see what was out in Oregon and the Northwest to tap. Well, there were beavers. And in Peter Skeen, Ogden, and Wyeth, and even Fremont, in their records, they show their records of trapping hundreds and even thousands of beavers from Central Oregon, trapping over 100 beavers in a day on the Crooked River by Prineville. Not knowing that beavers were the winter food of the Paiute people because they don't hibernate. They're in their homes year round. And they're eating their stores of willows that they have stored away to last them through the winter. So the beavers still are fat almost all winter. So with the destruction of the beaver, our people retaliated against the the ranchers and start killing their cattle. In trade, they took our beavers, well, we're going to take their cattle. As spring and summer came, the idea of land ownership was something that was strange to Indian people, because Indian people didn't own the land. We lived on it and we honored the land like we honored our grandparents, like we honored our mother and father, because the land took care of us. It provided our meat, it provided our salmon, it provided our roots, it provided our leaves and grasses. Some of you people might not know, but we had salad back in the 1700s and 1600s and 1500s. Otherwise, we would have never survived on this land for 100,000 years. The cattle, the horses, the sheep were eating our root tops. They were eating our grasses. They were eating our salads. They were trampling and compacting the soil so nothing would grow. And so those bloodthirsty raids that were written up in the Oregonian, the Boise newspaper, the Canyon City newspaper, the Pendleton newspaper, the bloodthirsty Indians are on the warpath. We were only protecting those things that were put on this earth by the Creator for our use. Salmon quit coming up the mall here. Salmon quit coming up the Owyhee. Salmon quit coming up the John Day River, because of the gold mines next to those rivers were polluting the water with silt, and there were no longer spawning beds for the salmon. And plus the poisons that they use for gold mining, arsenic, mercury, those things were being released into the environment. And so our people had to wage war against the aggressors in order to survive. At the same time, in 1855, a treaty was signed at Fort Dalles. It was a treaty between the Wascos and the Warm Springs bands. And the area that was picked for the Warm Springs reservation for the Warm Spring and Wascos happened to be in Northern Paiute territory, the traditional enemies of the Wascos and Warm Springs. And so when they set up the Indian Agency at Warm Springs, on 2 occasions, maybe 3, Chief Palina and his warriors chased all the Indians, the workers for the Indian Agency, the superintendent, the small detachments that were there at the Warm Springs Agency, chased them back to the Fort Dalles and ran off with their cattle and horses. For over 15 years, the Paiutes fought to keep their survival in Central Oregon. Chief Palina became so famous, everybody wanted to have a story, a Chief Palina story, that they fought in a battle against Chief Palina. And through the years, I've read different reports that have come to light. And you have people in Canyon City up by John Day saying that they fought a battle with Chief Palina and his warriors up by Canyon City. But on the exact same date in Fort Rock, the Army was fighting Chief Palina, and they knew it. And even people over in the Ontario area were fighting Chief Palina when he was fighting the Warm Springs Indians at Warm Spring Reservation. So everybody wanted a piece of Chief Palina. On one occasion, near Warm Spring Reservation over by Prineville, while Paulina and them were out fighting against the soldiers, his camp was discovered, and his wife and children were taken hostage, and they were used to bring him in to negotiate. So him and Wewa came in and surrendered to the army, and they were taken to Fort Vancouver as prisoners of war. Well, the other chiefs that I mentioned, Poni, Itzaama, Egan was still a warrior, yet he had not attained chief status yet. They were still fighting for their livelihood in the Central Oregon. And when they found out that the army was getting ready to leave from Fort Vancouver to go to battle in Central Oregon, Wewa and Paulina, through the interpreters, volunteered to lead them into Central Oregon, which was a mistake, because once they got into their own territory, they took their children and their wives, and then they hightailed it back to join their people in their war for survival in Central Oregon. How many of you guys know Ochiko National Forest up around Prineville? Do you know Ochiko was a Paiute chief? In our language, his real name is Otseho. During the wartime, he was a war leader also, but as time went on and more of our people were getting killed, he moved south up here to the Fort Rock area, where the Yapadikad people were. That was their territory of the Northern Paiutes. The Klamath people call them Apas, but we call them Yapa. And that's where they were at. Eventually, Chief Otseho moved here to the Klamath Reservation and brought his people here. As time went on, they hired a new general, or a colonel, I think he was a colonel at that time, George Crook. They had just finished some campaigns in the Southwest Desert, Arizona, New Mexico, fighting the Apaches. And he came, in my research, he came to know and understand the Indian way of fighting from the Apaches. If you read Civil War history, if you read Revolutionary War history, Americans and British knew nothing of guerrilla warfare. And the Apaches introduced them to guerrilla warfare. Hit and run, hit and run, hit and run. They could never catch the Apaches. It was the same with the Paiutes. The Paiutes were all over Central Oregon, hitting and running, hitting and running. And like I said, for 10 to 15 years, the Paiutes stayed one step ahead of the army. And they brought General Crook into Oregon to fight against the Paiute. And he used our tactics against us. When the white people fought their wars, they took a break in the winter so that their troops would rest. But General Crook learned from the Apaches to unceasingly pursue his enemy. So he fought the Paiutes in the wintertime and destroyed our caches of food, our winter supplies, found our winter camps and raided our winter camps. And then by the spring, our people finally gave up because they were almost starving without our winter caches of roots and dried deer meat, and dried salmon, and the foods that we put away that sustained us through the winter time. So they signed an agreement in the 1860s with the army to cease fighting at that time. Paulina was still roaming, and then in the 1860s, Paulina came here to the Klamath Reservation and even signed the Klamath Treaty and brought his people here because Chief Ochiho was here and Choctaw. But the same thing that happened at Warm Springs, the same thing that happened at Fort Hall, at Nespers, at Colville. The federal government didn't increase the rations that were promised through the treaty. With the Paiutes joining the group, they only gave enough rations that was applicable to the treaty to the Klamath and Modocs. And so the Paiutes were left out on this reservation, which inevitably led for Chief Ochiho to leave here from the Klamath Reservation, and he moved east into Surprise Valley, where he's buried. Paulina went back to warring for a short time until April 25th, 1867. He got killed by either Mr. Clark or Howard Maupin, who the town of Maupin is named for, north of Madras. In one last attempt to bring food to his people, they raided one of the cattle herds of a combined Howard Maupin and Clark, and they were running off cattle back to Central Oregon, and they stopped overnight over by Ashwood, over by Antelope, in the canyon there. And in the early morning, Howard Maupin, Mr. Clark, and another, I think his name was Atberry, I think, can't remember his name, but they attacked them. To their advantage, they had the brand new repeating rifles. So 3 men against a warrior contingent under Paulina didn't match the repeating rifles. Paulina was hit in the hip. His warriors retreated up to the rim rock, carried on a fight with them. There was another warrior was killed, whose son was named Holko, and they witnessed Paulina's death. And when Howard Maupin came down, Paulina was still alive, and Howard Maupin shot him, took his life. And in order to disgrace Paulina, Howard Maupin took his knife out and scalped Chief Paulina. In the 1900s, I'm going to go forward a little bit. In the 1900s, Chief Paulina's nephew, Charlie Wewa's son, and Holko's son, and Oitz, one of our medicine men, was called Oitz. His son, Calvin and Mark Johnson, they rode to Howard Maupin's store in northern Central Oregon and asked Howard Maupin for our great-great-grandpa's scalp back. He had it nailed above the door to the entrance of his mercantile. You'll never read what I'm going to tell you in the history books. Not long after they asked for the scalp and were turned down by Howard Maupin, his store burned down. In that time, in the 1912, 1914, when my grandma was telling the story, I thought about it for a while, and then I asked my dad. I said, Grandma was telling me a story about when Grandpa Charlie and the Johnson brothers and Neiman Hall, they rode to Howard Maupin's store and asked for the scalp from Paulina. And my dad looked at me. Grandma said after that, the store burned down. And then I told my dad, did our great grandpas burn that store down? My dad never answered me. And it was a while after that that I asked, I again remembered the story, and me and my grandma was traveling, so I decided to present the question to her, and I asked her, Grandma, remember you told me the story when Grandpa Charlie and all them went to Howard Maupin and asked for Paulina's scalp back and the store burned down. Did they burn it down? She just looked at me, so, what do you want to know that for? That was a long time ago. In that time period, none of the roads in Central Oregon were paved. They were still dirt. And much of the traffic that was still going across Central Oregon in the early 1900s was still on trails, cattle trails. So there was no state police, there was no county sheriffs, there was no police forces. In fact, when Peter French got killed over by Burns, they didn't send anybody to investigate. He was shot by another rancher. So that was the law of the Old West. So I guess my people, my family, got our justice. Maybe the store would have still been standing today, but who knows? That's one unanswered question that I didn't get an answer to. As time went on, like I talked about the reservations, in 1872, Chief Egan became the chief. There's a letter that I have in my possession from the Fort Harney Indian Agency. In 1872 was the last mention of Wiawiwa. After that, Chief Egan is more mentioned in all the journals, the Indian agent books. So at that time, my great-great-great-grandfather must have passed away. In 1872, they signed a treaty for the largest reservation in Oregon. The Malheur Indian Reservation in Southeast Oregon was 1.7 million acres. They had an Indian agent there in the beginning that he was okay. And then the second Indian agent they had there was, last name was Parrish. He was good. He made the annuities that came from Fort Dalles stretch out for the people at the Malheur Indian Agency. He taught our Paiute people how to farm and till the ground, how to plant seeds and crops. They had a portable saw, and he taught them how to use the portable saw to build buildings that were at the Indian Agency, and also to build shelters for themselves at the agency. He was a really good agent. As more of the Paiute people heard about the generosity of Agent Parrish, more Paiute started to show up on the Malheur Reservation. So Agent Parrish, in some of the letters I read in the National Archives, he petitioned the federal government for more money to buy more seed, to get more plow horses, to get more of that stuff. And then the federal government said he's asking for too much. So they replaced him. They replaced him with an Indian agent whose name was Reinhard. Reinhard was one of the colonels who fought against the Siletz and Grand Round Indians, and he was a mass murderer of those people in the Willamette Valley. He became the agent at Malheur. He no longer had the teaching attitude to help to try to make my people self-sufficient. He literally forced the men and women into slavery. He let them plow the fields, he let them harvest, but he had a merit system set up that when I tell you to go and do this, you do it. If you don't do it, you get a demerit. I'll cut your part of the corn, I'll cut your part of the wheat. I won't give you hay for your horses. I won't let you use the wagon. People started to hate him. The straw that broke the camel's back at Malheur was a little boy was playing and he was pretending shooting a gun. And Reinhard didn't understand the Paiute language. And he thought the boy was making fun of him. So he went over and he grabbed the boy's ear by the ear. And he dragged him to the post because he was going to whip him. But in doing that, he ruptured the veins in the little boy's ear and his ear was bleeding. And then he tied him to the post and he whipped the little boy. And then the father of the little boy came and Reinhard had the soldiers arrest the father and tie him to the post. And then he whipped the father too. Egan protested along with the other chiefs. And that drew us up to what our people already knew what was happening with the Little Bighorn in 1876, the Nez Perces in 1877, and then now that brings us to 1878, and what happened at Camas Prairie in Idaho. The Paiutes knew that the Bannocks and Shoshones were coming into Oregon and were asking for the Paiutes to join them against the white people. Egan wanted to avert war, and a lot of the leaders wanted to avert war. And they took their people into the Steens Mountains and the foothills, the canyons, to hide from the soldiers because they wanted no part of war. I'm not even using my slides. I don't know where the clicker is. Somebody can do this. They were supposed to have me a clicker. Or maybe that thing's the clicker. Okay. Oh. That's a picture of George Crook, the ruthless colonel that fought against the Paiutes. There are no pictures of Wewa, the head chief of all the Paiutes. But this is the only picture of my great-great-great-grandfather, Chief Palina, that was taken here at Fort Klamath when he signed the treaty, Klamath Treaty. Our people said that when they put him in front of the camera, and in those days they had those long lenses on the front of it, he thought that all the raiding, all the fighting that had happened, that now he was coming to meet his end. So he put his hand over his heart and closed his eyes to pray for himself, and they took his picture. So it's the only picture that exists of my great-great-grandfather, Chief Palina. As time went on, this is a picture of Paiute people in 1870s. As you can see, my people were already in the 1870s, 1860s, were already wearing white man's clothes. They weren't dressed in buckskins like the Sioux and the Nez Perce and the Blackfeets, and that we were already starting to assimilate to using white people clothes. This was taken at Fort McDermott. One of the chiefs that was at the Malheur Reservation, because that mentality of moving all the Indians onto reservations, all the Paiutes in the state of Nevada, at Pyramid Lake, Walker Lake, Fort McDermott, Summit Lake, Lovelock, Winnemucca, Battle Mountain, Duck Valley, they were all brought to Malheur, including Chief Winnemucca. I think it was for punishment because in the 1860s, Winnemucca's son, Chief Numaga, had a war with the soldiers in the state of Nevada in the 1860s. And as punishment, they moved them to the Malheur Reservation. As a part of that move, a very educated granddaughter of Chief Winnemucca was Sarah Winnemucca. When she was a little girl, her dad allowed her to go stay with white settlers at Fort Churchill in Nevada. So she learned the English language, she learned how to read and write. She had a command of the English language. So when her grandfather and them were moved to Malheur, she moved to Malheur and was hired on as the interpreter. Why am I telling you this? Because when the Paiutes took to the hills to hide from the Bannocks and Shoshones and avert war, Sarah Winnemucca told the soldiers where our people were hiding. And so the soldiers, not differentiating against the war faction and the peaceful faction, attacked the peaceful faction, drawing the Paiutes from Malheur into the Bannock-Paiute War. A lot of the work that Sarah Winnemucca did was to bolster her grandfather, Chief Winnemucca's power, and she always referred to him as the head chief of the Paiute Nation, not recognizing Chief Egan and Itzama and Pasigo and all the other chiefs. In 1998, they were going to name a school in Reno, Sarah Winnemucca Elementary School. And they went to Pyramid Lake and asked the elders there, could we have some elders come out and talk about Sarah Winnemucca? We're going to name the elementary school for Sarah Winnemucca. The elder says, no, I don't think anybody will do that. So they talked to different men. I'll go ask somebody at Walker River. So they went to Walker River. No, you have to talk to people at Pyramid Lake because she was from Pyramid Lake. Why don't you guys go talk to people at McDermott? Pretty soon, they ask people, and finally ask Wilson Wewa at Warm Springs. And then they called me and I told, nope, can't do it. And they said, she's the most famous Paiute lady. I says, among white people, she was a traitor. She had our people killed. She told where our people were hiding. Many people died because of her intervention. So they ended up having no Paiute representatives when they named Sarah Winnemucca Elementary School in Reno. Before the Bannocks got to the Steens Mountain area, there was a battle by Silver City in Idaho, in which Chief Buffalo Horn was killed. And then the leadership went to some minor warriors until they got to Oregon. And Egan was one of the bands that were attacked, and some of his family was killed. And then he became their leader during the war until they got over by Riley. Some of you know where Riley's at. There was a battle there at Riley. And Chief Egan got shot in a hip, and he had to be tied to his horse until he was finally killed over by Pilot Rock, Oregon. There were Umatelas that joined the Paiutes and Bannocks in the John Day River country. And they were fighting against the soldiers alongside the Paiutes and Bannocks. But when they got into their home territory, they jumped ship, and because they were home back to the Umatilla reservation, they jumped ship. And then there was going to be a parley to stop the war. And so the chiefs of the Umatilla said, well, we're going to meet with the Paiutes and the Bannocks. And they sent one of the Umatellas that were with them fighting and told them they want to meet with you guys. They picked a place to meet, and they said they're going to put a tent there, and that's where they'll meet you. But the chiefs from the Umatellas will not meet you guys if you guys come with guns and knives. So they went without weapons. And then when the Umatilla chiefs rode in, they shot all of our leaders as part of that parley. At that time, Chief Egan's head was cut off. His brother's head was cut off. His brother-in-law's head was cut off, as well as other leaders. And they were presented to the army surgeon and to General Howard as proof that they had killed the Paiute leaders, the Bannock leaders. And it was turned over to the army surgeon, because at that time, the theory that was being taught in universities back east was that intelligence was based on the size of the cranium. So a lot of Native American during the wars, heads were cut off and sent to Washington, D.C., so that their heads could be boiled down and measured to show that Native Americans were inferior to white people. After the War of 1878, our people went back to Fort Harney, the old Indian agency. And as they were rounded up, the army took over 400 Paiutes from Fort Harney and marched them to the Yakima Reservation in Washington, to Fort Simcoe, as prisoners of war. Contrary to American history, the Cherokees are not the only tribe that has a trail of tears. During that trek from Fort Harney to Fort Simcoe, I heard the stories in the mid 1980s. There were some elders, which included my grandma, that were in their 90s and over 100 years old. And they were marched in the middle of the winter. The leaders tried to talk the soldiers into waiting until spring, when the rivers were shallow and the snow had melted, but they marched them in the snow. The records show that all the men were chained to a 5-pound ball on their ankle. There were wagons that had food for the prisoners and for the soldiers, but even the women and children had to march. They didn't let them ride in the wagons. And while the soldiers enjoyed bonfires to keep warm during the night, my people only had the body warmth of one another to keep warm. the snowy nights. One of our elders who talked said that her mother told her that there were 2 births on that trail. And when the mother of the one baby laid down to give birth, one of the soldiers rode up and got off his horse and grabbed the baby by the leg and crushed its skull against the rock, because they didn't want the baby to be a hindrance to the march. Several of our old people wandered off the trail, choosing to freeze rather than suffer the indignity that they were going through. Another baby was born and was thrown into the snow to freeze to death. I remember seeing those old ladies cry when they told the story. The one elder lady said that would have been my grand aunt if she would have survived. Today in history, we look at George Washington, Andrew Jackson, Abraham Lincoln, John Adams, Paul Revere, General Custer. We look at those personages as patriots. Who were fighting for their country, who did not want to be under British rule. But my chiefs, Paiute chiefs, Bannock chiefs, were murderous savages. Our people were protecting our land, like I said. The land was our Mother Earth, provided everything for us. Our people tore down fences because it disrupted the migration of the elk and the deer and the antelope. To my people, the land belonged to everybody, including the white people. But to be shot for going across somebody's property was foreign to our people. And so they fought to protect what we had. Inevitably, Chief Winnemucca was allowed to go back to Pyramid Lake, and they were given an executive order reservation at Pyramid Lake. And they were given an executive reservation at the Walker River. And many of their people ended up making colonies next to some of the big towns of Winnemucca and Lovelock, Fallon, Reno, Carson City, Susanville, Burns, Klamath Falls, Prineville, Bend, Redmond. There were communities of Paiutes in all those places as late as the 1950s. I was sharing with my benefact that there's this Paiute cemetery in the city of Prineville. The Pioneer Cemetery is surrounded by a chain link fence with a nice gate, nice lawns that are cut when it gets too long. And right next to it is the Paiute Cemetery that's overtaken with sagebrush and cheatgrass. So even in death, my people can't find peace. But the fight continues because we're educated now. And we want to rewrite history and include our side of the story so that people will understand why there were wars, needless wars. Today, I still crawl through fences to go dig roots. I'm 70 years old, I still can crawl under a fence, fill up my root bags and crawl back under the fence and go back to my car. I've learned to use onyx so I can see BLM land, forest land, and private land. So I know where I'm at. And many times I do dig on private land as long as I know where the house is and I know that they're like 5 miles away. I'll still go dig roots there. Many of my people aren't as brave as I am. In 2003, we had an altercation with a landowner where some of our Paiute remains were disinterred. And it was a 5-year fight. And during our hearings with the federal solicitor from Washington, D.C. and the federal judge, through elders like Ralph and Clarence DeGormo from Fort Bidwell, Erwin Weezer from Beatty, my dad, Wilson Wewa Sr., and myself, some of the elders at Burns, we finally won our fight for reburying part of the remains at that ranch. It was a hard battle, but one of the things that came out of it, because the Paiute signed the treaty in 1872 in good faith, and we were not the ones that breached the treaty, and we proved that. In the 1850s, there was a commission put together called the Indian Claims Commission that investigated what happened at Malheur. And the federal judge told us in 1998, all the public lands in the state of Oregon, as far as I'm concerned, the Paiute people still have unlimited access to those lands to hunt, fish, gather, and camp, because they were never relinquished under a treaty. And the federal government broke that trust responsibility that did away with the treaty. And when the treaty was taken away, that restored your rights as Paiute people. I've never tried it because our tribal attorney at Warm Spring will probably be on vacation when I get thrown in jail for hunting, so I don't want to try it. But like you heard me, I still go gather. I gather my medicines. I gather our paints. I gather our foods. Because that's our way of life. My great-great-grandfathers protected that way of life. My great-grandfathers protected that way of life. My grandpa, my granduncles protected that way of life. My grandma, my dad, my uncles, my aunties instilled it into us to protect that way of life. And so we still teach that to our children. When we have Christmas dinner, Thanksgiving, birthdays, I cook our Indian foods and my grandchildren eat it. Because our grandma told us, one of these days our people may have to go back to that kind of a living and not depend on what's in the stores. I think about that, about her words all the time. There were times when I'd fished the Deschutes and some of its tributaries where we never took We never took pop. We never took things. Somebody that grew up in the 1960s, pop was too much for 15 cents a bottle. But we just belly up to the river and drink out of the river. You'd never catch me drinking out of the Crooked River or the Deschutes now. But water is sacred to us. And when I first heard they were selling bottled water in a store, I thought that was the most ridiculous thing in the whole wide world. But Warm Springs and a lot of communities are on a public water system, and guess what's in our water? Chlorine. Guess what chlorine is? It's a carcinogenic that causes cancer. So guess what Wilson Wewa buys now in a store? I buy water. Something I said I never do. I've told as much of knowledge as I have in the 50 years, 55 years I traveled with my grandma and sat at the tables of old people that were in their 80s and 90s. I could talk your ear off for 3 days about what I learned from those old people. There are a lot of stories that are untold here in this community, the Klamath Reservation, Fort Bidwell, Pyramid Lake, all the places I named. And just now, some of us are choosing to come forward to share so that people can get a better understanding of the life way of our people and why we fight so hard to protect those things that we use on this land. Our fight is no longer with guns and bombs and cannons. Our fight is in courtrooms and on paper and in Congress. All we want to be is equal. Like the Declaration says, Declaration of Independence says that we are all created equal. That's all we want for our people, is to be created equal, and for people to acknowledge that we have had a way of life that has sustained us in this country for over 100,000 years. Why do I say that? In early 2000s, they were excavating in Los Angeles more land by the La Brea tar pits, and they pulled out mammoth bones that had saw marks on them. And they extracted the DNA out of those mammoth bones, and those mammoth bones were over 100,000 years old. The sandals at Fort Rock, which are 15 to 18,000 years old, are just a small part of proof of the length of time my people have been on this continent. Our legends tell us, the Paiute legend that I know tells us that our people were here and a big famine hit the animal people. And the grizzly bear, the chief, the wolf, sent the animals to all the directions to find food, a better place to stay. The grizzly bear went north. When he came back, he told all the people that gathered, he says, I only went so far, and there's a big wall of snow. I couldn't go past it. I went to the east, it went into the lake. I went to the west, it went into the lake. And all the animal people wouldn't believe him, so all went to the north. And they seen that huge white wall. So the eagle flew up as high as it could go over the wall and came back and said, there's nothing but white as far as the eye can see. Look at your history to see when the ice sheet from the North Pole was receding. That's another indicator of how long my people were here. If my people were here when the ice wall was still there, there's no way my people came over on the Bering Strait theory. We were already here. Our creation story talks about when the wolf, when his brother complained for land to be made, and the wolf sang his power song and the land started to grow. And the coyote complained, "Oh, this land is all muddy. I don't like walking around in mud. Do something. It's uncomfortable. I can't lay down and sleep. It's too muddy. My hair gets all wet." And he's always complaining. So his brother used his power and he made fires all along the edge of the land. And I used to tell that legend for years to people and then to my grandkids. Then I thought, what if those fires were Mount Shasta and Mount McLaughlin and the Three Sisters, Mount Jefferson, Mount Hood, Mount Adam, Mount Rainier? What if those were the fires? Then that means my people were here before when the volcanoes were still alive. I heard international speakers at a conference that talked about legends and myths and fairy tales. And one of the themes that I heard by some of the people that have done more extensive research than myself is that sometimes it takes between 500 and 1,000 years for fact to turn into an incredible story. I think I'm only supposed to talk an hour. I bet it's about 10 o'clock now. But I'm going to open some time for questions. 8:15. So does anybody have any questions? Is there something that's just killing you to know? I might be able to answer it, but if I can't answer it, I'll BS you. I think you all know what BS means. I gather bitter roots. I'm really bad. I don't know the English names for most of the roots I gather. I gather tsuga. I gather hopi. I gather hunibwi. I gather yappa. I gather pasigo. My goal every year is to gather 5 gallons of each of those, because we also use our traditional foods when we have funerals. It's a must that we serve our traditional foods during funerals. So I try to gather as much as I can in case we get unfortunate to lose a member of our family. Then I don't have to go and ask other people to put on our table for us our Indian foods. So there's people out there that probably would say, there's women that are jealous of me because they can't dig as much as I can. And I go out more into the hills to go gather than a lot of people do, because I was raised by old people. It's in my blood. I'm an old person now, and it's in my blood even more. I don't want to be without. So, and then our medicines, I gather our medicines. My grandsons get sick. They live in Portland. Their mom will text me, "Matthew wants you to bring some throat medicine down. Devon wants you to bring those leaves you boil for headaches." So I have to always give them medicine. And then people in Warm Springs occasionally ask me for medicine. So I always try to have medicines on hand to help our people and keep that tradition alive. In the past, our people used to used to cook a lot of the foods in those stomach pots made out of the stomach of deer or elk that was close to a fire. And then they'd heat rocks red hot, drop them in those stomach pouches and make the water boil, and then put the roots in there to boil them. I have a friend that taught me how to cook acorns, and it's a process. It's something I would never do by myself because you have to be fast. You have to heat your rocks red hot, dip them in water real quick and drop them in the pot, and then you have to have another person that fishes out the hot rocks before the red hot rocks burn through your rawhide pouch. So it's a process. Our people had it down. They survived that long. Our people made frames that they put over the fire, like, I don't know if you know what a sweat house is, but they made willow frames like that to cook elk meat, buffalo meat, antelope meat, bear meat, all that hanging on there. That was our oven. Our food was roasted on those things. And there are, like I said, there are foods that are seasonal. We only pick salad foods during the springtime. Sometimes we only eat the shoots. Sometimes we only eat the stalk. We have to gather them at a certain time before they start getting woody. So we have to have that knowledge that's been passed down for thousands of years of when to get our food. And then there's some foods, if you get them too early, they're poison. So you have to know when to gather them and how to cook them to leach the poison out of them. I thought our people up here were like that, but I visited South America, and we had one of the people up in the Andes Mountains cook for us up there, and they cooked some of their traditional foods for us, and one of them was a root. And I couldn't go hiking because of my size. I walked from here to that speaker there, and my heart was pounding, and that's like, why I better not have a heart attack up here, because if I have a heart attack up here, we got to go clear down that dirt, windy road, shoot, well, wreck, and you could spit from the side of those road, and your spit would probably drop 1,000 feet before they hit the side of the thing. And I said, no way, I'm having a heart attack up here. But I ate that root while all the other guys went to go see a wondrous sight that I didn't get to see because I couldn't walk very far. My heart just couldn't take it at that elevation. And when they came back, our interpreter was talking about the foods that we were eating. And they said, oh yeah, this root that you guys are eating, if it's not cooked correctly, it's poisonous. And when it's not cooked, some of the jungle tribes put their arrows in it when it's raw to poison their arrows. And I was like, it tasted good, and I ate like 3 of them. But I've been around the world. I've tasted other foods. I was in the Amazon. I got to drink that drink. Maybe some of you seen it on National Geographic, where all the men sit around a wooden bowl and spit into it until it gets enough, and then they mix it with berries and let it ferment, and then they drink it. Mix it with water and drink it. Made with spit. Because it had berries in it, it was. I think I'd like for the people. I don't know if some of you know what wild plums are, right? It kind of had that tangy sweet, which kind of clouded out thinking about the saliva. But I didn't have very much of it because it's intoxicating, so I didn't want to get intoxicated. I might wander off into the jungle. But yeah, I still go gather food. It's such a priority to me that people that know me, if if I have said something scheduled with them and then I call and say, hey, I'm not coming, I'm going to dig roots this weekend. Well, he's not coming then, because they know that's my priority. Because once the foods go away, I can't make them come back. So I jump at it when they're out. Next, I can't go tomorrow because I'm here. So then my next time is going to be the 9th. My last chance at gathering roots at Burns is next weekend on Saturday. I'll be at Burns for Saturday and Sunday digging roots. My last chance. No, it won't be. Then I'll wait till June till the camas is ready. Then I'll go dig camas. But camas, you have to cook camas under the ground for 3 days for it to be ready to eat. And that's a long, hard process too. You kidding? I use a pot. Faster, cleaner. Yeah.
Was fire used common plants that you guys use culturally, food or other medicine?
What was that?
Would you apply fire on the landscape?
Fire? Yes. We've always used fire as a way of keeping our gathering areas clean. A lot of times our people burned in the fall time when the dew would start to set on a lot of the plants, because you don't want to scorch the ground, as you probably know from forest fires. If the fire is so hot in a forest fire, it'll scorch the ground and nothing will grow there. So that's why I think our people were just like scientists in our own way. We were not uncivilized, I'll tell you that much. We had to have mathematics because our people, look at those hats in there. I mean, they're very tiny weaves. So you had to have mathematics in order to know how many strings and how many different weaves you had to use to do that. Our people traveled at night because they knew how to navigate with the stars across the Oregon Desert. So we knew astronomy. We knew botany. So we knew we couldn't eat white camas because it was poisonous. We couldn't use Indian hemp to make thread if there was sap still in it, because Indian hemp sap can kill a cow. So we knew all those things, those tricks throughout time of how not to poison ourselves. And I had a young man that he had an ailment that he went to the doctor about 5 or 6 times, 2 different doctors. And he was just exasperated because everything they tried on him didn't work. And it was a man problem. And so we were talking, and then he told me, do you know any medicines? And we start talking about it, and I listened to him. And I told him tomorrow, because we were driving home and it was nighttime. And so the next day I went and I gathered those leaves, then pounded them up, and then he steeped them. And I told him only drink about a quarter of a cup before bedtime for 3 days. Don't go past that. So he did. It went away. And then, I don't know, must have been a year, maybe 2 years after that, he was asking why 3 days? I didn't want to tell you this in the beginning, but that plant can kill a horse. So I have to tell you the way that my grandpa and my grandma and my old people told me how that was prepared, and that's all you get. I said, and it worked. I said, if I told you it was poisonous, would you have tried it?
Mr. Wewa, thank you for speaking tonight. I understand you can't talk about it per se. There's a lot of work being done now on our climate regulations and rules and that such. How do you feel your ancestors spoke a little bit how the people weren't stupid, they weren't fools, compared to the scientists, right? How do you think they would look at it now that people are asking for help to revitalize these lands?
How the outside world is asking for our help in order to renew our lands? Is that what you said? In essence, it's about damn time. You know, one of the ironies is that our children were rounded up in the 1800s and hauled off to boarding schools to civilize us. My question to a lot of people, academics especially, is who has the right to define civilization? It's like I said, we had mathematics, we had astronomy, we had botany, mineralogy, we knew harvest times, we knew crop rotation, because our people never went to the same root grounds year after year after year, knowing that if we went to them, they would deplete it and they might not come back again. So the old ladies would say, don't take us there this year, let's go to this place. We went to that 2 years ago, we better go to this place. Let's not go pick huckleberries here, let's go here. Let's let it rest. So even now, us elders, me, my age, are telling our children the same thing. So we knew those things. We would have never survived here over 100,000 years if we didn't know how to do those things. We never killed deer when the does were fawning or pregnant. We knew not to kill deer when does were carrying babies. We knew when not to kill bucks when their meat tasted ugly for obvious reasons. We knew all that. We knew we couldn't eat certain parts of the fish because we'd die if we did. How did we know that? How could uncivilized people know those things? And again, who defines civilization? Maybe if we were given a chance to continue to live our own way, maybe there wouldn't have to be a reservation system. Maybe there wouldn't have to be a way of dominating and making us learn to read, write, and arithmetic. You know what? We send our kids to school today. I'm getting off the subject here. Shouldn't have asked that question. A lot of our kids don't know how to read, but they're passing them through the school system. If I were to write a letter to any one of my grandson in cursive, they wouldn't know how to read cursive. They don't teach them no more. We need to get away from that archaic thinking on education that you have to learn the classics. When I was in high school, I had to take algebra, and they couldn't beat it. They could have offered me $1 million. I would have never learned algebra for $1 million. They just could not convince me that algebra had functionality in my life in the future. Maybe that Oregon Education Board will take away my high school diploma they put me in consumer math, which I aced, and I still got my diploma. And I didn't need algebra. I still don't need algebra. But you know what? My grandsons were staying, I was raising my grandsons for a couple of years, and my grandson came home and, Grandpa, my teacher said that you need to help me with my homework. Okay, well, as soon as I get done cooking supper, we'll do your homework. So we got done with supper, cleaned up, sat down at the table. Okay, bring your papers in here. Let me look at them, see what you got to do. It was algebra. But you know what? 45 years after I graduated high school, I figured it out. And my grandson got an A on his paper, and he was so proud because I explained to him how to do those formulas. I surprised myself. Crazy.
After all these crimes of the Asian government. And what happened, you know what happened to him?
I hope he died. You know what? University of Oregon, for about 4 years, they had a really good professor over there that wanted to do some Oregon history stuff. And so for years, he had a Northern Paiute history class at the University of Oregon. They reached out to me. And that was one of the things that I told them was, if you're going to teach about Oregon history, why don't you have some of your students do some research on the Indian agents of the reservations in Oregon? Where they came from, how they got to be where they were, and what happened to them after the reservation wars ended. But Reinhardt did. He had political connections, and that's why he got appointed as an agent at Malheur. But after Malheur, I don't know what happened to him. I think actually, wasn't he? You're a museum guy? Didn't he end up down here as the Indian agent?
He was in charge, he was the commander of Fort Klamath for a time before Malheur. After that, I think he was There's been a gardener shot.
Anyhow, yeah.
You have great memory and great knowledge, and you shared connected stories here and given us a big picture. Has this been recorded before, and is it being recorded tonight?
I think there's probably more people on the YouTube right now listening to me talk than you guys are in this room. So I know I was surprised. Matthew there did a fantastic job of publicity. I had people from the Colville Reservation, Fort Hall Reservation, McDermott, Duck Valley, Warm Springs, Yakima Reservation, Pyramid Lake Reservation, Siletz Reservation. Hey, Wilson, you're talking tonight at Klamath Falls? It's like, what? Who said that? It's on Facebook. It's like, what? So yeah, I talked for a special program during Native American Month in November before the COVID, and we had about 80 people in attendance at Boise, but there was over 3,000 people that signed in on that lecture on the internet.
The first part of this, I watched
So anyhow, Oregon State University, who published my legend book. I still work. I'm the director of senior services for the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs. I've been there for 43 years. I was a young man. I was the bus driver. I was the janitor. I was the gardener. I was everything. And now I'm the director 43 years later. I've been trying to retire for 3 years. OSU wants me to write another book. They want me to do geographical features, Paiute names of geographical features that correspond with the legends in my book. And I got talked to by one of the professors that wants to help me to start writing the Northern Paiute history side of Oregon history. And I'm like, I don't have time. I barely have time to do these lectures, but I'm here. I enjoy talking to people. I enjoy educating people. I enjoy giving people a taste of what my old people left with me. I always thought that I would only have it as personal stories from my own heart and for my own family. And it has blossomed from that for me, and being a public speaker and teaching other people the unseen and unheard stories of the Northern Paiute people. And I like that. I'm glad you're all here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming in. Huge thank you to Wilson for being. That was fantastic.